Before we begin, I acknowledge the country from where I join you today, the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging who have been sharing, learning, living and working across this nation of Australia for tens of thousands of years. We encourage you to put into the chat today where you're joining us from across Australian lands or indeed from overseas. Welcome to everyone who has joined. My name's Jazz Chambers. I'm the Chair and one of the co-founders of Ocean Decade Australia, and I'm joined by Board Director Dr. Lucy Buxton, and also Karen Evans, I believe, is online as well, also co-founders. And we thank the many people who have been talking to and liaising with us in preparation for this briefing. This is part of the knowledge series that we've launched at Ocean Decade Australia, which will contribute to our Developing Knowledge Hub, and you will hear more about that in our future newsletter. Ocean Decade Australia is a national NGO founded in 2021, and we have the privilege of speaking and working with many hundreds, if not thousands, of ocean stakeholders each year, connecting people up across the ocean community that is so diverse in Australia. Next slide, thanks. Today's agenda is really about the Barcelona trip, but also there is a need to give you some background on what the Barcelona UN conference is about, the Ocean Decade Conference is about. So we will start with some of that background on the Ocean Decade framework and the structure of it, recent reports and outcomes that have been coming through, the conference itself, Australian contributions and actions, and about Ocean Decade Australia and points of contact for future. Next one, thanks. As a quick refresh, many of you will know about the global goals for sustainable development and their interlocking design and interdependency. Next slide. This is our preferred nested system version of the goals, as they emphasise the importance of our planetary systems and the interactions there at that foundation ring, that if we've got those in a sustainable fashion, that we will have the right foundation for a stable society and then a thriving economy. And of course, all of that requires deep partnership as well. So not something that probably many people on here are unfamiliar with, but always good to refresh ourselves on that. Next slide, thanks. Of course, our focus is on SDG 14, life below water, but as mentioned, the dependency and interdependencies is something this audience will be well aware of. What happens on land does, of course, impact the sustainability of the ocean ecosystem. Next slide. So why the ocean? Many of you will know a lot of this information, but we put it up here to always have that touch point back to what the ocean ecosystem is doing for the planet and for its inhabitants, most particularly humans. There's a lot at stake when we talk about ocean challenges and ocean opportunity. And so our risk appetite as individuals, communities, businesses, governments, as nations is very much in play as a result. Helping determine that risk appetite together is at the heart of Ocean Decade Australia's mission to understand what success looks like for the great diversity of ocean stakeholders, given the interaction and interdependencies of ocean. Next slide, thank you. The Sustainable Development Goals each have targets with indicators. We're not going to obviously delve into the fine print here. That's all available for people to look at. But we are champions for the use of frameworks such as the Ocean Decade, the High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, because when used and governed well, these global targets can be broken down and nation states, people who collaborate on programs, community groups, companies and individuals can actually see their efforts in the context of these big global things. It's one of the things that we hear a lot from people is, what can I do? How can I contribute? What does it lead to? And that's why we very much champion this notion around these sorts of frameworks. Next one, thanks. The latest SDG progress report is sobering, but this is one from a couple of about 18 months ago, and the way in which the SDGs are reported on does change, and there is some movement there. And we are seeing a movement towards the green, which means on track, which is heartening to see. This is globally. If we just go to the next slide, we can see what the report card looks like for Australia in this slide in the context of rest of world, and our monitoring against SDG 14 is still seeing some risks, but it is actually looking better than it was. Next slide. Thank you. So this is our report card here on life below water. Again, all of this is available online, and you can actually, what I really do like is that they track which year we're referencing. So we can see we've got some pretty old data sitting there from 2018. So I would anticipate that things are hopefully looking a bit better, but this is the information that we've got at the moment that's in the report from 2023. Thanks. Next slide. This graphic demonstrates that the contribution of the ocean to the achievement of other SDGs and those interdependencies does actually examine some of the co-benefits between achieving ocean targets and, for example, achieving against contributions to addressing climate change. So this, again, these frameworks, you can delve into them, you can spend a lot of time on them, which we do, and they're all part of the evidence that demonstrates ocean's clear contribution. Next slide. So the Ocean Decade, again, many people will know it was declared in 2017 by the UN that we would have a decade of ocean science for sustainable development. At Ocean Decade Australia, we've always viewed the decade as a platform opportunity for collaboration and partnership, learning and action for a sustainable ocean future for Australia. The Ocean Decade is and has at the heart of it science for sustainable development, and bringing those two things together is really important. And the framework, therefore, is important. Next slide. The framework was invented by a global community, thousands of people, many Australians amongst them, meeting for a number of years to develop this roadmap the next slide, thanks, to get us from the ocean that we have, that you can see here, to the ocean that we want. And across that requires action, addressing of challenges and outcomes ultimately as well. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I'll just go back to that. You can see up there in the top left hand that science is seen as the key enabler of addressing these challenges to get to the outcomes that we desire. But of course, science does not act in isolation, but rather provides the knowledge, the tools and the expertise to address challenges by governments, industry, business, the corporate sector, communities and individuals. So it's, while it is an Ocean Decade of science for sustainable development, we need all the actors involved. Next one, thank you. There is a present set of 10 challenges and they're outlined here, including understanding and mapping the pollution and contaminants, stresses on ocean ecosystems, how we sustainably feed the world's population, and how to enhance multi-hazard early warning services to prepare communities. There is literally something here for everyone to address. So you may see yourself across quite a few of those, whether you come from an energy or food business, scientific or technological, technical company, education and training, conservation, restoration, or community action and advocacy groups. There is something for everyone in these challenges. Are the challenges exactly right? That's part of what the conference is going to be about, and we'll talk more about that shortly. Next slide, thanks. The framework is also outlines these 7 outcomes that we're after, and I don't think anyone could argue with any of these outcomes. They pretty much capture most of what we would like to see. It's really important, though, to understand that the framework does not set targets. So it's not saying this is what you will do, this is how you will do it. That happens in other places, and certainly some of the development that's being done around the framework is heading in that direction. But the reason for that is that it would not be appropriate to expect the same from a small Pacific or Caribbean nation as for Australia, the US, or Norway. But it does provide a roadmap and mechanisms for contributions from all ocean stakeholders to be counted towards the global effort. And indeed, anyone can be a contributor towards those. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the outcomes. The actions that can be taken are in a variety of forms. So programs are large-scale research initiatives or networks addressing one or more of the challenges. Projects are focused research initiatives that can contribute to programs, so within programs, or specific funding initiatives put forward by the Decade Coordination Secretariat and Unit. And these two types of actions have specific calls and timelines for submissions that are advertised on the Decade website. Activities are things that many of us are doing, conferences, briefings, white papers, exhibitions, and so forth. And there are many of those. And contributions in kind or financial resources that go towards supporting the Ocean Decade Secretariat and Coordination Unit. So that's to give you an idea of actions. I'd just like to, next slide, thank you, thank Rachel, who is driving the presentation, by the way. So thanks to Rach, who's actually been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the analysis around Australian-led or Australian contributed action at the moment to the UN Decade. As you can see, of mid last year, there were 477 globally endorsed actions, and Australia is leading or contributing to 22 of these. By contributing to, that might be one of those large scale programs that I mentioned, and Australia is providing data into or doing the work on the ground, etc., into those large pieces of work. We have scheduled interviews and actually started to interview all of the different contributors who are undertaking those actions to check in on progress, but a huge thanks to everyone who has put up actions for endorsement. Just a reminder there that that number does not include the many, many activities that have been endorsed, and Lucy will speak further to that later on. Next slide, and I'll hand over to Lucy Buxton. Thank you.
Thanks, Jazz. Okay, great. Well, now we'd like to jump in to discuss the agenda setting at the conference and the key objectives that we're hoping to reach. On this slide, we have a snapshot of Vision 2030, which is Australia Ocean Decade strategic ambition setting process for the road to the end of the Ocean Decade. To strengthen momentum for ocean-based solutions, the Ocean Decade has launched a process to identify a common measure of success for each of the 10 decade challenges that Jazz has just outlined. And it will take stock of current trends, gaps, and priority user needs, and identify key targets and milestones that we can use to measure progress and enhance the collective impact across the decade. The Vision 2030 process will provide the answer to the question, what does success look like for these challenges at the end of the decade? So how does it work? The process will determine user needs, priority data sets, gaps in the science, as well as the knowledge, resources, infrastructure, partnerships, capacity development, and technology that is required for each challenge to ensure that it can be fulfilled. And through concrete indicators and methodologies, the Vision 2030 process will contribute to the evaluation of the impact of the Ocean Decade and identify the mobilization of resources where they're needed and ensure the ongoing relevance of the challenges over time, which is something that Jazz touched on in her presentation slides earlier. Next slide, please. So how is it structured? Vision 2030 process is coordinated by IOC UNESCO in its role as the coordinator of the Ocean Decade, and it's led by 10 expert working groups, each dedicated to a specific challenge. These are large multi-stakeholder groups, including representatives of the decade actions, government, intergovernmental organizations, the private sector, Indigenous and local communities, early career ocean professionals, NGOs, academics, researchers, philanthropic organizations, and they also represent diverse demographics of age and gender. Each of the 10 working groups is led by 2 co-chairs. So on this slide, you'll see that there is a list of the papers that have been produced. These were released in January this year by the 10 working groups. These are draft strategic white papers, and we would like to acknowledge the participation of many Australians in the working groups and consultation forums for their contributions in the development of these papers. Next slide, please. So there may be people on this call that have made contributions to these 0 drafts. The white paper structure is outlined on the right-hand side. There are 10 papers all available for download. And ODA, we have been doing an analysis of these papers to understand the deep dive that they each present, but also to understand and assess Australia's potential contributions to date and in the future against the challenges and milestones that the papers outline. Next slide, please. So there's a process that leads to the conference through this. So the 0 draft papers were released and open for public consultation in January and February of this year. And just before the conference, the version 1 will then be available. These versions will then be presented and discussed during thematic forums at the Barcelona conference, and that will ultimately provide a platform for global stakeholders to engage, share insights, and collectively advance the implementation of the decade challenges. From there, after the conference, the papers will be consolidated and the development of an operational plan to implement the strategic ambitions of each challenge. So before I move on into more detail about the conference agenda, I would like to call on our colleague, Dr. Karen Evans, who has been part of some of the consultation on this. Karen, are you there?
I am indeed. I can't start my video though.
Okay, let me see if we can help with that. How about now?
Great. Thank you very much. Hello. Just as a bit of background to everyone who's online at the moment, my name is Karen Evans, and I work for CSIRO here in Lutruwita, which is Tasmania, Nipaluna, Hobart, and I pay my respects to elders and the traditional owners and elders of the land on which I'm speaking from today. So I've been engaged with the Vision 2030 process through a number of avenues. I'm a co-chair of the Global Ocean Observing System expert panel on biology and ecosystems, and so we've been reviewing a number of the white papers as part of being part of the IOC system. I'm also joint coordinator of the World Ocean Assessment for the 3rd World Ocean Assessment, which will be delivered towards the end of 2025. And part of the reason we've been involved in this process is that we're very keen to work with the co-chairs to ensure that the main messaging coming out of this Vision 2030 process is captured within the World Ocean Assessment, particularly in providing that view of where do we where do we need to go to over the next 7 to 10 to 15 years to really transition the ocean into a sustainably managed ocean. And then finally, I've also been involved in this process as a member of the steering committee for the conference. And so as part of the steering committee, we've also been overseeing part of this Vision 2030 process and how it will be incorporated into the conference. So I guess two things that I'd just highlight is that there are the 10 white papers, but there will also be an outcomes report that is generated. And that outcomes report will be a standalone document that really brings together the key messages of the white papers. Individually, but also looks across the white papers to really, I guess, pull out those key messages in where the strategic ambition of the Ocean Decade is going and what might be needed in order to rethink some of the components of the Ocean Decade. The Ocean Decade recognises that, yes, these challenges have been put forward at the beginning of the decade, but things change as we move through the decade. And so there might need to be some revisioning of challenges. There might be some new or emerging issues that need to be incorporated into the challenges. But also, this is really the first of 3 opportunities that are planned where the Ocean Decade is really looking at where have we got to, where do we need to perhaps shift our thinking, what do we need to incorporate that might be new to ensure that we achieve those outcomes that that Jazz articulated just a moment ago. And then finally, the other thing just to mention is that some of the key messages from each of the white papers will actually be integrated into what is being called the conference outcome statement. That outcome statement is intended to be a short statement of the key outcomes of the conference, and I believe Lucy will walk you through what the components of the conference will look like and how they're focused around the 10 challenges. But the key output from that or outcome from that statement is that it will be taken to the 3rd United Nations Ocean Conference in 2025 and be put forward as a key component of that ocean conference. The Ocean Conference, the United Nations Ocean Conference, is a large conference that brings together the world's nations, so has governmental representation from nearly all of the countries of the world, and it brings those countries together so that they can come together and evaluate progress that has been made specifically on the Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is life below water. So the conference is really focused around where are we at in terms of our understanding of the ocean and where do we need to get to in order to achieve that SDG. So this particular conference, the Decade Conference, is a key component that will feature at that larger conference in 2025. Thanks, Lucy. Was there anything else that you wanted me to?
That is fantastic, Karen. Thank you so much. Clearly articulated what a very complex but very robust and thorough process this has been, and thank you for explaining how that leads into this meeting in April. Those items that you discussed, and we do have some questions coming in the chat about these papers that you're talking about, we will make sure that we update our stakeholders through the Ocean Decade Australian newsletter and any other ad hoc communications as those papers are released. So thank you, Karen, for your contribution to this process and also for your comments and insights today.
Thanks for the invite, Lucy.
Great, thanks. Okay, next slide, please. So as Karen has outlined, this is very an important meeting for all of the reasons she's explained. It will be held in Barcelona across 3 days and will bring together this global community of partners. This is now the 4th year of the United Nations Ocean Decade, and so it's going to be an important check-in point, as Karen has mentioned. As an outcome, in addition to the papers, these discussions that are happening on the ground will provide a foundation to really look at the mobilization, operationalization of the challenges. And the conference will be part of a much bigger Ocean Decade Week that will take place throughout Barcelona between the 8th and 12th of April. There are going to be a number of different side events, which we're going to talk about in just a second as well. Next slide, please. So as Karen has pointed out, the agenda for the 3-day meeting is grouped around the challenges so that these sessions at the conference can shape that knowledge exchange around the challenges, bring together international representatives to discuss the priorities, and then share the learning and development of the operational plan. In the registration for the webinar today, we asked participants if they will be attending the conference. And so we've been able, through that, to start to build a picture of Australia's participation, representation from different sectors, and who's might be going or presenting at different sessions. For Ocean Decade Australia, we're delighted that our abstract was accepted, and we will be presenting in session 2, highlighted here, which is going to be focusing on the sustainable ocean economy and sustainable blue food. And we'll be presenting a summary developed through the white paper that we released last year, which will have a focus on Australia's perspectives around developing a sustainable ocean economy. I'd also like to note that Jess Brown, who I believe is on the call today, who is based in Australia, has been working with The Economist and the Nippon Foundation, and they've recently released a roadmap for action, how to understand and beat pollution by 2050. That's on the Back to Blue website, and Jess will also be participating in some of these sessions. Next slide, please. So what we know already with regards to Australian-led activities, we've got those up on the slide here. We'll be hosting a reception event, and if you would like to come, please shoot us an email and we can touch base to receive an invitation. As I mentioned, we'll also be delivering our own conference presentation, and we're aware that the University of New South Wales and Kelp Forest Alliance will be doing a side event. Please let us know what is missing from this slide with regards to Australian-led activities, but also if you're going to be there, if you're presenting, hosting, or contributing to other multi-stakeholder or multinational sessions, we'd love to hear about that so that we can help coordinate activity on the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, fantastic. So on the next slide, please, we are going to now turn our minds to what happens outside of the conference. And there was some chat in the, some conversation in the chat about this as well. So global contributions against the delivery of the vision are really key to understanding what activities are being undertaken and how Australia is or might be able to contribute. This is ongoing work outside of the conference and other standalone meetings that is key to the organizing principle of the decade. And as Jazz mentioned in her slides, this is the framework allows us to gather knowledge, address problems, and measure impact. And this then leads to more connected discussion, decision-making, and regional leadership. So this slide just shows some of that activity that is underway. On the next slide, however, we would like to just turn our minds to how this is coordinated globally. So collecting national data and the coordination of activity measurement is commonly undertaken by national decade committees. These are really critical connectors between the global ocean decade and national stakeholders and indeed their regional partners. They are voluntary committees, very inclusive multi-stakeholder platforms that are set up to coordinate, support, and increase a country's participation in the decade by mobilizing that whole of ocean community at a national level. It is worth noting that Australia does not yet have a National Decade Committee, but we see the NDC as a key mechanism for sharing information, measurement, and coordination. And Ocean Decade Australia has been widely consulting on this for the last 2 years, and we're currently pursuing the proposal to have an Australian NDC with relevant groups, and we welcome you to connect with us for more information on that. Next slide, please. So the Ocean Decade Progress Report provides information on the key outcomes of Ocean Decade implementation across the 4 main pillars of activity. That includes decade actions, governance and coordination structures, resource mobilization, and stakeholder engagement and outreach. As a result of the first call, the Executive Secretary endorsed 31 decade programs, 92 projects, and 42 contributions. And we've undertaken some analysis of this and also drawn from the figures in the report when analysing the geographical coverage of endorsed decade activities in terms of location of the lead partner institution. The data in the report shows very strong leadership from North America and Europe, but relatively low numbers from Oceania. This does not mean that Australia is not contributing across other activities, but Australia has not been identified as the lead partner institution. And that's something that we'd love to see shifting over the coming years. Next slide, please. So before we get into the further analysis, just a quick recap. So this is the box here shows the initiatives. These can fall across contributions, programs and actions. We have data on contributions, projects and programs, but the following analysis excludes data on activities, which is not publicly available. We have requested it to put into our analysis. And we've mapped this against the decade framework to identify where most of Australians' effort is being made. And another big thanks to Rachel, who has been leading this data analysis project. Next slide, please. So when looking at Australia's actions, as identified by the lead institution location being in Australia, we've mapped this against the decade challenges, and what this what this data has been able to reveal is that most of Australian-led activity falls against Challenge 2, which is protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity, and Challenge 7 and 9, which is expand global ocean observing systems and the systems and skills and knowledge and technology for all. You can see there also some of the diversity between projects, contributions, and programs, which gives an idea of the scale of some of these initiatives. Next slide, please. When we then looked against that same data and mapped it against the outcomes, many of these contributions have clustered around 3 main decade outcomes. One, outcome 2, which is a healthy and resilient ocean, 4, a predicted ocean, and 6, an accessible ocean. It is worth noting that there is a really good range here, but those are the main kind of clusterings against those outcomes. Again, we'd love to hear from you if you are looking to submit an endorsed action or would like to discuss this in other ways. Next slide, please. So how does this then translate into the application in our country or region for the benefit of, for example, environmental or economic impact? On this slide, you can see some of the applications of decade actions in supporting things like energy transition, marine protection, food security, and hazard measurement. So as Jazz mentioned in her slides in the opening, SDG 14 does actually have a lot of connectivity and link to an uplift across many other societal benefits. At ODA, we have the privilege and the benefit of seeing so many extraordinary activities taking place across Australia over the past 3 years, from new technologies that are now scaling at a national or even global level, through to the greater understanding and appreciation of Indigenous sea country custodianship and management practices. A number of these have been highlighted in our Ocean Summit white paper, but our database of innovations and activity grows daily. Next slide, please. So while we do know about those Australian-led actions that have gone through the endorsement process, and there are some fantastic ones in there from groups such as Minderoo, Piping Hot, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, Project Restore, Griffith University, and many more. However, based on the stakeholder engagement that we do as an organisation, we are aware that Australia is not currently capturing the breadth and depth of the extraordinary work that is out there. And we would love to see more endorsed and Australia-led actions. Next slide, please. We know that there's a huge array of activity and it spans everything from coastal, even onshore, and deep ocean research. So if you would like to get in touch with us for more information or share some of the activities that you've currently got underway, we would love to hear from you. I'm going to throw back to Jazz now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lucy. And I just love seeing those pictures of everything that's happening across the Australian landscape. We are very fortunate to be able to speak with the innovators and the makers and creators of great work in Australia, whether that's looking at things through a finance lens or creating new products or new ways of doing things. And a shout out to a number of people who I know are on the call, and we've grabbed images of your amazing work and thrown it in here, but thank you for that. We are very keen though to think about the ways in which we measure action. Next slide, thank you. And that's really to speak about who we are as an organisation, and the way that we work. Next slide. We started in 2021 and we're a national not-for-profit organisation, and we have a vision for achieving a sustainable ocean future for all Australian stakeholders. The way in which we wish to do that is by initially connecting up ocean stakeholders through knowledge, networking and learning, and where appropriate, facilitating or coordinating activity. We really dislike duplication. So if something's already happening, then we're not so interested in that if it's happening well, but we are very keen on that connectivity piece. Next slide, thanks. The reason for that is cultivating connections and exchange. We can see that there is a stack of activity that occurs, whether that is in the energy sector or it's in the food area and so forth. But the actual ability to make connections across finance, let's say finance, fishing and energy as an example, as well as community-based activity that is impacted by all of those activities, that's the sweet spot for Australia's ocean opportunity, and that's what we're about. So connecting, catalysing for ocean knowledge gaps between different stakeholders. We all come to ocean very differently, sharing stories and then mobilising that new knowledge that different groups might have received from each other into accelerated solutions. Next slide, thanks. I want to touch on this particular piece here because it's important in the context of how we think about the UN Ocean Decade. So we've talked about the Ocean Decade as not setting specific targets for nations. We have those outcomes that we're after. One of the things that I was talking to someone just yesterday about is the fact that UN decades are announced. There's multiple decades on the go at any one time, but they don't come with funding. That's really something that is up to individual nations to decide how they're going to make their contributions towards a particular program or campaign like a decade. Separate but aligned to the Ocean Decade is the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. And Australia has played a key role as one of the original members of the panel, and our Prime Minister is the member of the panel. Next slide, thank you. One of the commitments as part of the membership is to develop a sustainable ocean plan. And Australian government has been consulting on this for the last year and has provided draft priorities to date. They've done a lot of work. This is all available on the website around the different phases in the development, the information sessions that ran last year, and the workshops as well. There will continue to be consultation on this, and then there will be a plan for an ocean summit opportunity, finalisation of the plan at some point this year, and then implementation through 2025. So that's what's available publicly, and there has been some great activity that's occurred already. They have provided draft priorities, and these are fabulous to see. They include ensuring First Nations people are central as part of the ocean economy and have a lead role in sea country decision making and ocean policy development, taking ocean-based climate action to reach net zero and improve the ocean's resilience to climate change, strengthening collaboration nationally, regionally, and internationally, protecting and restoring critical ocean ecosystems, supporting ocean industries, and that's across that broad range of fishing, aquaculture, energy, tourism, ports, shipping, and so forth, advancing equity and inclusion, improving ocean knowledge, and ensuring adequate finance. You can see the connects, and Steph, I note your comment that you put in here around all these different aspects of ocean policy, big commitments to things like the 30 by 30 and things like the State of the Environment report, and how all of that actually funnels into deliberate action for Australia. That's something that is at the core of what Ocean Decade Australia is seeking to do, is to gather all that information and assist in putting forward proposals, and that's a big part of what happened with the Ocean White Paper. So the Summit White Paper. What this tells us, this sort of a plan, is that the government is committed to stakeholder engagement, and that's really terrific to see. Next slide, thank you. In the course of our work, we have created a detailed segmentation of Australia's ocean stakeholders, and it should not be surprising that pretty much everyone's an ocean stakeholder. Actually, everyone is an ocean stakeholder. I won't qualify that. This information is from 2021, and so it is more nuanced now. We spend a lot of time working in the database, and we're delighted to have over close to, I think, 2,000 people in the database representing over 700 organisations. So we continue to work on the database and identify stakeholders and the segments, and also the differences based on geographies and the ocean basin in which people are located. That's an extremely important lens to look through as well. Next slide. Thank you. Back to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Jazz. So at ODA, we do this. We actually action this through a number of different activities. Collaboration, as Jazz has said, is really at the core of our work. We also, as a not-for-profit, provide an independent platform for discussion across sectors, and that's one of the things we're really delighted to do, to bring together unusual partnerships for conversation. We do a lot of mapping, as we've outlined in some of the data that we've presented today, and as Jazz has said, some of the analysis that we've been undertaking through our consultation and through the database. And then we produce communications and reports, and we also host different forums, events, and panels in order to help connect stakeholders and drive this national ambition. Next slide, please. So here I'm just going to outline a couple of slides that highlight some of our recent activity. Last year, we convened the Ocean Business Leaders Summit, which was an Australian first to have a cross-sectoral conversation, which was very strongly focused with the private sector, who are often not included or don't have a natural access to some of that scientific community. And it was a fantastic opportunity to really, at a very high level of decision makers, help understand and identify what those priorities were, particularly with regards to some of the upcoming regulation and other policy frameworks affecting the private sector. Next slide, please. From that, we produced a white paper, which was an endorsed activity, and this is available for download on our website. It's been a wonderful tool. We've had great feedback on it as a tool tool that has helped support further deeper discussion and that cross-sectoral understanding. Next slide, please. And of course, we also, as we've outlined here, in addition to engagement across all and very diverse stakeholders, we have spent quite a lot of time in the last 6 months on sustained engagement with government. As Jazz has outlined, there are some key roadmaps, national roadmaps happening at the moment, and we've been participating in those working groups and committees, but also through our own initiative, trying to support that information sharing across portfolios in the government, Australian government, and through international bodies. Next slide, please. And an example of that, next week we're off to Canberra. ODA is going to be co-hosting a parliamentary briefing on Australia's position, particularly with the ocean economy, and we're delighted to have been invited to do that. Next slide, please. Of course, we can't do this as a voluntary organisation without the participation of our other contributing organisations, and we really just want to thank, this is just a snapshot, this is not everyone, but we hope that it gives you an idea of the breadth and depth of the organisations that we speak with, and some groups that have made significant contributions through time and expert advice in our understanding and shaping of some of these actions and outcomes. Next slide, please. And lastly, some friendly faces. Some of them might be on this call. Again, just a representation of stakeholders from academia, government, private business, entrepreneurship, community, recreation and sport, tourism, etc. Okay, so next slide, please, Rach. In closing, what we would love, we hope that this has given you some information now about the deeper understanding of the frameworks and how that's going to lead into the action agenda at Barcelona. We would love to for you to be in touch with us in order to share information, priorities and activities ahead of the meeting, so that we have a good understanding of anything that is of particular importance and relevance to you. We are also providing a point of contact for coordination on the ground, and our contact details are on the next slide, but just pause for 1 second. And lastly, with the return from Barcelona, we look forward to sharing more information through ODA channels, newsletter, and picking up on some of those papers and points that Karen picked up on in her comments. So thank you all very much for joining us. Our last slide, please, Rachel. Please reach out with any questions. I can see that there's already been some great chat here online, and we look forward to following up with you on specific conversations. And also, if you'd like any more information about us, the white paper, some of the tools and resources, you can visit our website. Thank you all very much.